In 1992, William Kitchen and Kim Bird sat around the table discussing their favorite extreme sports like skydiving and bungee jumping. They developed a method to repeat this sensation for the average person. The vehicle they chose to execute this extreme thrill? Well, it's your body. And Skycoaster was born.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Alright, today's video, I kind of was digging through some stuff and I came across Skycoasters and I'm like, you know what? Let's talk about Skycoasters this video. So here we are. If this is your first time here, make sure you like, subscribe, share, comment, do all that stuff downstairs. It helps the channel out and I'm trying to grow the channel as much as I can these days, which is extra hard to do during the off season because most people just aren't looking for ride stuff, you know? So let's talk about Skycoasters. Okay, so what is a Skycoaster? It uses your body. It's a giant swing, essentially, that can reach anywhere from 85 feet to 300 feet. I mean, they're all over the spectrum of every single size, shape, and everything out there that you could think of. Skycoaster, which is now, I believe, Ride Entertainment owns Skycoaster. They were originally built in the early 90s, and that's where they started to be built, but they're still being built today. They're still being installed today. Also, by the same token, a lot are being removed from parks as well. For instance, there have been, just that I've looked at kind of some facts, there have been 85 Skycoasters installed. 45 of them, however, have been retired, leaving only 40 still in operation today. I know a lot of parks have gone through and removed the Skycoasters. Now, Skycoasters are a shared experience with the ride manufacturer. So basically, Skycoasters are not included in park admission. They're an upcharge or an upsell, whatever you want to call it. They cost extra money once you come through the gate, pretty much no matter where you are. And that is one thing Skycoaster actually tracks. Skycoaster actually tracks how many people have gone on it, what the revenue is from that, and revenue generated. The parks have to send money to Skycoaster, and the equipment that's there is really interesting. The equipment that's actually installed and purchased for the site is technically Skycoaster's equipment. So the parks actually do the groundwork, and they say, okay, we're going to install the footers and everything else to support the ride. And then Skycoaster kind of like lends them the equipment to actually install, but the park is in charge of operating it. Now, we'll get into some of that inspection criteria in a little bit, but it's kind of one of those weird things, and I'm not 100% sure on the exact terminology and who gets what and who has to pay for what. I just know upkeep and maintenance, that's the park's deal. The park has to pay for it. Park purchases parts from Skycoaster or Ride Entertainment, and then they can fix their own units at the park. So let's talk about the Skycoaster theory of operation. Okay, how does one of these things operate? So you start in the flight suit area. This is where you go get on your flight suit. Now, this isn't your normal tuxedo and tie. This is looks like a special sleeping bag. The best way to describe it actually is the same device harness that you would use to strap into a hang glider. It looks like the same exact thing. It's kind of like a sleeping bag looking material with a bunch of straps coming off the back that hook up to the device for the Skycoaster itself. Now, once you're in the suit, which is called the flight suit, once you're in your flight suit, you head out to the flight line. This is where you actually get hooked up to the ride itself. Once you go up these stairs, they're either a set of rolling stairs. Ours had rolling stairs, so most of this video I'll reference the stairs a lot. Or some of them use a hydraulic scissors platform to lift up in the center. And it attaches to a set of steel cables that go all the way up to a giant lattice or arch frame looking thing that supports the weight. Once you're hooked up to that, you're hooked up to another cable that goes to a back tower. This is going all the way up and over the back tower and back down to a hydraulic winch assembly. They will either lower the scissor platform or pull the stairs back out of the way of the riders. And then that area that is where the stairs were, that is called the zoom zone. I'll probably reference that later as well. Once the riders are ready, they will go ahead and winch up the riders. Like I said, on the back tower, there's a hydraulic winch package, much like you'd find on a full-size roller coaster or something like that. And this winch will lift the riders all the way to the top of the back tower. Now, once the riders are up there and they've stopped, the flight crew will yell at them and say, okay, 3, 2, 1, fly.
Fly.
And then you're supposed to pull a little ripcord on your flight suit. Once you pull that ripcord, you actually cut away from the back tower and you experience pretty much a free fall for a little bit, and then you start to swing out. And then once you swing out in the front, you swing back and forth a handful of times, and then the flight crew has to come out, and what they'll use is what's called a lander, so you can grab a hold of something and it slows you down and prevents you from just sitting there and penduluming forever waiting to find the low spot of the ride. So you grab the lander and that stops you, and then they go back out with either the stairs or the hydraulic scissors lift it back up, set you back down, unclip you, and then you go back to the flight suit area and take your flight suit off. You've just ridden a Skycoaster. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so groundwork. There is typically the groundwork area of a Skycoaster is fenced off. Now, it's typically fenced off all the way around. They don't really let people walk through the middle of them because Skycoaster is always worried about something coming off of people. So they don't like them walking underneath the Skycoaster, but it's not unheard of. I've seen other installations where they did that. They left the area just underneath the center tower closed off because Skycoaster requires that. Again, that area is like your infield to a ride. They said we don't want anybody in that area. And then inside that area, inside that perimeter, there is a small, narrow little strip of land in there that's sometimes marked off with yellow or red stripes. I believe per service bulletin there were supposed to be red stripes on the ground. That little box, that rectangle, outlines what's called the zoom zone. The zoom zone is where you and your friends, because a Skycoaster can hold up to 3 people per side, so it's where you and your friends are actually coming the closest to the ground right there. That is the closest point to the ground where it is also the most dangerous for anything to be there. So the zoom zone is a special outline zone where nothing lays, nothing sits, nothing's around that area. That's one of the things that before, while you're being winched up, the attendants have to make sure nothing gets in or around or can come into that zoom zone while you're being hoisted up to the back tower. Now, speaking of towers, okay, the variations of Skycoasters out there, there's different heights and there's different configurations. A lot of them use an arch for the front tower, what's called the tower. The front arch is typically a lattice, which is a bunch of pipes or a bunch of L-beam bracket type looking things that are put together to make this giant archway looking thing. Now at the top of the archway there is, depending on your size, but most of those big archways, they have 2 flights that could happen off of either side. There is a total of 6 cables up there. There's 3 cables for one side, 3 cables for the other side. Those 3 cables have names, we'll get into those. But basically those cables are what you're suspended from. And then on the back, depending on how many lines there are, whether you have a 2-line model where you can run 2 different flights side by side with each other, or you have a single line model, there is the launch tower on the back of the ride. The launch tower is typically just a singular either lattice structure or a pole standing up there, and that houses all your launch equipment on the back side of it. Now there are terms for these. One of these style rides is called a lattice style and the other one is called a monopole style. The monopole styles are actually manufactured by a different company and Skycoaster has purchased those and that's what is actually installed out at the ride. I have the most experience with the monopole style. The park where I worked, we had a monopole style. Another park that I frequently went to, they used a lattice style. But the one we had was a monopole style, so it's a solid round structure. They honestly look like giant telephone poles once you're up next to them, but it has 2 towers that come up and has one big beam across the top of it. those pose their own unique inspection problems. Unlike the lattice ones, they're a little easier to inspect. But in the back tower, the lattice goes straight up. They're typically at an angle to compensate for the flight line, but the monopole styles go just straight up vertical on there. Okay, so let's start at the bottom and talk about the loading system. Like I was saying earlier, most Skycoasters use a set of rolling stairs. Another set uses a scissors lift style lift that comes up in the center. Both have their ups and downs to them, quite literally. The scissors lift has much more inspection to it because it is basically a man lift that's embedded into the ground. Now, these things come with their own certification and their own criteria, so there's a lot of stuff that goes on to that. The majority of times a service bulletin came out for the Skycoaster, it was regarding the scissor lift because it has all sorts of little pinch points and things to NDT and inspect, and every time the scissors crossed each other, there was another thing to go wrong on that. Now, the scissors lift had to be monitored so that it would not allow the flyers to be winched up while the scissors lift was in the up position. Because again, when you're screaming through that zoom zone at the end, it would be catastrophic if that were up. So there's sensors that monitor and make sure that scissors lift is in the down position. Now, the rolling stairs, what I have the most experience with, those rolling stairs, they had the same thing. Now, they were a solid structure on a four-wheel track down at the bottom. That's all they were. It was like a set of railroad tracks that ran out to the center of the flight line. The flight line is basically where you load and unload guests. So those solid stairs would sit there, and then you would load people up, and then you would take the stairs and push them back forward towards the front of the attraction. Now, the stairs would leave the zoom zone by about 10-15 feet, and then the stairs would park right there. This was a 100% manual process. This was not automatic. There was no motors. There was no nothing else. It was simply just the attendants would push the stairs all the way from the flight line out to the other side, and then once the stairs were all the way back, they would take a manual strap and hook it to the post nearby to make sure the stairs couldn't roll forward. On top of that, or I should say underneath that, there is actually two limit switches underneath there with little cam arms on them, so when the stairs went all the way up towards the other side, those limit switches would push down. Once those switches were made, that again allowed your flight to be lifted up to the back tower. Yeah, let's talk about controls right here while we have this. All right, since the whole thing is hydraulically powered in the back of the ride, it has a hydraulic power package back there, there's only really one set of controls, and that's up at the front of the flight line, out of the zoom zone to where no one is standing up there. But what happens is the operator has to take a pendant and push and hold a lifting or an up button on there. At the same time, they have to go over to a manual box and push that as well. So it takes two different buttons being pressed at the same time to start the up process. This prevents an accidental start from happening. Now, for the majority of time, the pendant we used was just a wired pendant like you would use on an overhead hoist. It just had an up and down button on it. Afterwards, we went many years with that, and then we switched to a remote pendant system. The remote pendant was really nice. It was just it hanging off the operator's belt, and they would simply just do the same exact process, but they had the remote there, so they can push and hold that button and then push the other one, and it would start the process, and they'd start lifting the riders up. Now, let's talk about the flight cables. Okay, so when it comes to that front tower, each side, which are your flight lines, each flight line has 3 cables hanging down from that tower, from that overhead archway. So the 3 cables that are there, there's 2 flight cables and 1 counterweight cable. The counterweight cable is in the center. So the flight cables are the ones that are the most important. Those are the ones that are holding the weight of the riders. That's a very important thing. So your flight cables on a daily, what you do is you typically go out there, and operations from the day before has left the flight cables. They come down to the middle and they hook up with the counterweight cable. So you typically go and unbuckle those things and just let them hang so they're completely vertical, straight up and down. While they're hanging there, they kind of rotate a little bit. The big thing on cables is that once they start stretching, they start to rotate. So if you take a cable and link it end to end straight, and then you stretch it just a hair, the rotation of the cable will start to happen. So that end that was straight, it'll start twisting one way or the other. So actually every day when you relax the cables out there, that's what it's called, when you unhook them and just let them dangle, as they're relaxing, you're actually watching the cable twist from all the stress that it had the day before. Now, this isn't just a cable stretching like it's mechanically going to fail. This is also very dependent on temperature, because you got to remember everything expands and contracts with temperature. So if it's really hot, they'll spin a bunch because that cable has been growing. If they're really cold, it will hardly spin at all because the cable hasn't grown at all. So the flight cables are 5/16 diameter. The ones we used were galvanized, but they do make them in other materials depending on your situation. So we always use the 5/16 galvanized cable. Those cables are good for 9,800 pounds. I wrote that down. They're good for 9,800 pounds a piece. What else are they good for? They're good for all sorts of other stuff around the park. When you have to pull a valley coaster or something like that, those cables work great for that. Every year, those cables have to be replaced. And every year, you have to destroy the old cables, which means there's a certification tag that holds on the end of the eyelet of the cable, and you can't put cables into use unless it has a valid certification tag. And since you're only good for 1 year, what you do at the end is you have to cut the ends off the cables and you have to destroy that certification tag. Now, depending on your park, we were in really good with Skycoaster, so we would just destroy those certification tags, and Skycoaster was like, okay, you guys are good. But some places, I could definitely see this if you're a mobile operator or if you're like a small park, maybe that doesn't do much business with them. Some places, they actually require you to either send the entire end assembly back or send the whole cable back to them so they can prove that those cables would be destroyed, because that is like the weakest link of the entire thing. They do not want those cables out there. But if you can destroy the ends of them and prove you destroyed them, then you could take the rest of that cable, which is perfectly fine, just a year of use on it, and use it for some other thing around the park. Now, I'm not saying use it in another ride at all, but no, there's plenty of stuff in the park we use, we need cable to do something dumb, like we're pulling something a long ways, and we just need something heavy duty, a little bit thicker than a rope. It's like, oh, go grab one of the old Skycoaster cables. We typically kept some in Iconics that were wrapped up there that were okay. But you couldn't use them for much because since you cut the ends off of them, they didn't have a load rating anymore, so you couldn't really use them in crane lifts or anything like that. But anyways, those are the flight cables. They're pretty stout, 9,800 pounds a piece. So what is that? That's right at about 5 tons. So each one of those cables can hold 5 tons. So you figure 3 passengers down there at the bottom. When you release, you come down, you get about a G and a half, maybe 2 at the most, depending on your weight. I don't even think it gets up that high. Like 1.5 Gs down there. So realistically, 2, 4, 6, if you had 3 people at 200 pounds apiece, 600 pounds sitting there, which is a lot. And then you multiply that by times 2, 1,200. So your safety factor is really big on the Skycoaster cables, so there's no real worry there. Okay, so those are your 2 flight cables. Those are the 2 that come down on the outside. Those are what you actually swing on. That attaches to the back of the harness, and it attaches to a flight release system, which I'll get into later. The third cable that's strung right down the middle is a counterweight cable. The counterweight cable comes down and connects to the launch cable. Now, I know I got a lot of people. Wait, that's not right. Okay. The counterweight cable comes down and it attaches to this triangular cable setup that's called the launch bridle. The launch bridle is a three component, it's a triangle, and it connects to three things. The counterweight, on the counterweight cable, it's connected up there. It connects to your flight suit, not the suit itself, but it connects to the launch bridle. That's what's actually connecting to the suit. And then the other side of it connects to the launch cable that goes up the back tower. So you have 3 points on there, but those 3 points together make what's called the launch bridle. The way it works basically is your flight cables come down and they connect to some carabiners which go to the back of your flight suit. It's basically right behind your back right there. Those hold you. Then on the other side, you have the launch cable and the counterweight cable. Those connect to your flight suit as well, but they connect via the 3-ring release system or the launch release system. Basically this guy right here. This is a 3-ring release system. You want to see it's homemade. You want to see how I made it? Watch this. Okay, I'm going to make a quick release. And for this, I've got some webbing, and then I got some rings. These are just some key rings, but they'll do. Just cut this guy in half. Like that. Fire. Fire. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this over, and then I'm just going to use some crazy glue right there just to hold that guy down. Just like that. And then basically what that's going to do is that's going to fold over. And as it folds over, you're going to want another one through there that basically folds over like that. Here's my launch end, and here's my other end right here. I put the nice little, what do you call that, rivet in there. Anyways, and then next is going to be this little guy. It's just a piece of paracord. It's 550 paracord. And basically all I'm going to do is put that in a nice little U like that and just give it enough to loop down. Now the last thing that's going to make this work, I'm just going to use a zip tie because that's what I've got handy, but in reality it's what they call, it's called the rip cord or the release cord that's set up through there. I can't remember how it's fished through there right now, but basically I'm going to try to hook this up here. So this is the launch cable in that comes down. And this is the part that's actually on the harness itself that you're harnessed up to. So this guy should come through here. That's hooked up through there. This one is hooked up through there. And then that little green cord goes over the top, down through that hoop in the center. Now I poke it over the back, and basically this guy comes through here like this. And then pull the cable out. There we go. All right. That is awesome. There's my homemade Skycoaster 3-ring quick release system. That's cool. So that is how the release system is made and kind of works there. So we'll go into that in a little bit as well. just a little bit more. Okay, so now you have your flight suit on, and you're hooked up to your flight cables, and now the launch bridle and launch cable have been taken and they've been attached to your 3-ring release system on the back of your flight suit. All right, so let's follow the launch cable. The launch cable is also a 5/16 diameter cable, and that stretches all the way up to the back of that top tower. And that top tower, it has a pulley up on top of there, and it goes down all the way to the base. And at the base, thank you, Skycoaster, for putting it on the base too. At the base, there is 2 hydraulic power packages. Well, 1 per side. We had 2. The hydraulic power package consists of a hydraulic reservoir filled with hydraulic fluid, a hydraulic pump, a hydraulic motor, and then a drum on that. The drum is where the cable spools up on. That's where your launch cable spools up on. And then it's got 2 proximity sensors that read that cable. So as it's coming up, one proximity sensor says the cable's at its down position, or that's where you would hook up into the flight line. And then when you hit the up button, it keeps going until that cable marks the other flag, and then that cable says, okay, we've hit the proximity sensor, stop winching up, and it stops the system from winching up. On the side of that drum, you have on your one side is the hydraulic motor that comes in that turns the whole thing. Skycoaster had the foresight to say, well, what happens if you break that hydraulic motor and the thing just goes into runaway? That's like your worst case scenario in that hydraulic power package system, because if it goes into runaway, then basically what happens is you would come down and go through the zoom zone, and then shortly after the zoom zone, that drum would run out of cable. So as it would run out of cable, the drum would still be turning really fast. It would suddenly stop and start, if you're rotating something one way and it runs out, the cable just doesn't come off the drum. It's anchored into the drum. So it would suddenly come out and then reverse and come back in quickly, which would cause an abrupt stop on the other side. It would be like hitting a wall. It would be really, really bad. So Skycoaster said, well, we don't want that to happen. So on the side of the drum assembly, they put a gearbox, but they did it backwards. So a little bit of movement into the gearbox would create a lot of movement at the output. And on the output, they put a mechanical governor. It's basically just a clutch that you would use on a go-kart or something like that. And they put that clutch there, and it's got centrifugal weights on the inside. And they basically said, hey, as long as it's going its max speed or whatever it's supposed to do, those weights won't come out and they won't engage the outside. The outside was just anchored with a big U-bolt on it. That was it. There was nothing else there. But if you were to say you broke that thing and the drum tried to go runaway, those centrifugal weights would come out and they basically grab against the outside, and through all that mechanical reduction, it would slow that drum back down. Not slow it down a lot, but it would slow it down to prevent a catastrophic runaway. So that's the overspeed clutch. That's a really cool component. Okay, let's talk about the suit you wear. The suit is a harness/suit. That's what Skycoaster calls it. That is made, like I was saying in the beginning, it's made like a paragliding or a hang gliding suit. It's meant to be, you lay down on it. Skycoaster has changed variations of this as well. They've made sitting chairs and a couple of other things out there that you can fly on now. But the suits are also really heavy duty. They're meant for one person at a time, but you could hook up to 3 of them up to the launch. They're actually made by a parachute company, so this company really knows what they're doing, and each suit can hold up to 10,000 pounds of weight. That's 5 tons. That's as much as that cable is rated for. So that's really impressive. Your cable and the suit are rated at the same exact weight, and you have 2 cables holding you. That's a lot of redundancy there. Now, the downside of that is that that hydraulic winch package in the back, that little tiny hydraulic motor is not that strong to lift 10,000 pounds. Even though it's not vertical, it's not able to do it. So the maximum weight, 3 riders, the maximum weight that they can have is 850 pounds. Now, when it comes to the flight suit stuff, that's my weakest knowledge on there. Now, a lot of people are like, wait a minute, if it's so important, how come it's your weakest knowledge? Well, let's talk real quick for a second about the inspection of a Skycoaster. The inspection is done via mechanics that do all the stuff like the front tower, the rear towers, the flight cables, the launch bridle, the stairs, the scissors lift, the hydraulic power package, the surrounding area. All that is done by mechanics. The flight suit and all the flight area components is actually done by operations. Now, it's not just operations, it's actually someone specific that was certified by Skycoaster to go out and do those inspections. So the park actually can't really say, oh, we're just going to train anybody on this ride all the time. There actually has to be a representative from Skycoaster there doing the training. That representative, if I recall properly, is the site controller. The site controller is the representative of Skycoaster. This is a person, like, they were an employee at our park, yes, but every year they had to go back for training to Skycoaster. They physically had to go to an external place to Skycoaster and do that training. So then that person came back, and then that person can oversee training of everybody else. They oversee the operation of the Skycoaster and make sure everything is being done to Skycoaster standards. Remember, Skycoaster kind of owns the ride. They're just doing a profit share program with the park. So it's this really weird little category of this thing out there. So once they winch you up to the top, you're winched up to the top. The cable comes across the drum, and it says, as it winds up, it says it's going, then it hits its high limit, and it says, all right, I've stopped. That's when they go, that's when this guy comes back into play right here. This is your 3-ring quick release. This is, if you're ever wondering, this is the exact same quick release that's used on a parachute. So what I found out is that the parachute uses these in the emergency cutaway. Like when you pull your parachute out, I'm sure people have seen this on movies and stuff. The main parachute gets twisted up or there's a problem with it or something, and they say you have to cut away and go to your reserve chute. When you cut away the main parachute, it's actually being held up by the 3-ring release system. And then when you pull the 3-ring release system, you pull that cable out of there, which is attached to your ripcord on the side of the flight suit. Once that comes out of there, it simply works off of this little tiny piece is released right there, which opens up that bigger piece right there, which opens up that bigger piece, which allows the whole thing to come apart. So these are your components. So this side would go, I believe this side goes to your launch cable, and I say I believe because, again, the flight suit and this 3-ring release system and the Omega carabiners that hook up the flight suit, we weren't as maintenance allowed to touch those because we were not certified to run people on there. So those we didn't have anything with them. That was completely operations and the site controller that took care of all that inspection. They had to be specially certified to do that stuff. Okay, so that's the 3-ring release system. As always, I forgot, like I typically do. Anyways, we want to talk about the manual lander real quick. At the end, while you're swinging down at the bottom of the ride, you have to stop. Well, it would take forever if you swung to a stop. So actually what they use is something called a lander. There are 2 types of lander. The first type is a manual lander, which is a piece of PVC with a loop on the end. That's where you grab the loop and the people literally pull you to a stop to cancel your momentum. The second type is what most rides have. It's a hydraulic lander. The hydraulic lander does the exact same thing, but except for a person using their momentum to slow you down, you're actually pulling against a hydraulic motor. Now, realistically, you're pulling against a valve that's set for weight. There's a low, medium, and high. The valve puts resistance on the drum that the rope is wrapped around. The rope is just a piece of, I believe it's 5/16 climbing rope, just regular rope inside there. But the drum puts resistance on it to the point where it will slow you down and bring you back to a stop. And then once you let it go, the hydraulic motor turning on the inside will actually automatically wind that rope back to the inside of it, and then the lander is ready to go for the next time. So a critical step. Most people use the hydraulic lander just because it's very easy to use. The employees don't have to do anything. But if that fails, or if it's a smaller operation, they'll use the manual lander, and then you're literally catching people with yourself, which could be dangerous if you have a lighter person catching 3 people. So that's why most places tend to use the hydraulic lander. Let's go into some of the inspections for maintenance. Daily, the entire tower has to be inspected. The front tower, the back towers have to be inspected. This could be done via like binoculars. You can just look at it. You don't have to climb up it on a daily. If you ever see any problem or suspect there's a problem, then you have to climb it. The flight cables are visually inspected every single day, and they're physically inspected once a week. Now, physical inspection, what does that require? That requires that while you're doing your climb up to the upper lattice or the top of the archway up there, that requires that you physically pick that cable up and hand over hand go through that cable the entire time. Now, I've gone through cable inspection a lot, but this is the infamous part where you would take the cable and per Skycoaster, you'd wrap a rag or pair of pantyhose around it and then pull the cable through it and make sure there's no little frayed ends coming apart on there. If you want to know more about cable inspections, I have videos about cable inspections. Go check them out. But the flight cables require 100% physical inspections once a week. The tower has to be climbed once a week. The back towers have to be climbed once a week. Lots of physical inspection on these rides. You have to really put your hands on everything and look at it all the way around. Now, the difference of inspection between that monopole and the lattice, that's where these two differ. And the lattice ones have a platform sticking out from the top where you can go up there, and that's where the cables are attached. So you can get on the platform and you could look right underneath there and you could see the cable attachment points. You could see the cable safeties, because the cable at the top has a safety wire that goes through it. It's another piece of 5/16 cable. Go figure. It goes through the eyelet in case the supporting shackles were ever to come loose, fall off, break, whatever it might be. You have another cable holding it on just as a safety. But on a monopole, it's not as simple as just going up there and looking underneath it. The monopole diameter is roughly 3 feet thick, and then the cables are underneath that. So in order to inspect those mounts and everything on the bottom of a monopole, you have to go up there and do this Mission Impossible over the side while somebody else is there and you're watching you, and you have to go and hang underneath and look at it upside down. It's really, really not ideal at all. If your Skycoaster is small enough to where a man lift can get up to that, great. Then you can use a man lift and get up there. Ours, we had a big man lift that got up there and it just barely didn't make it to the point where we put our man lift up there and we got it as close as we could, and then we literally had to use a ladder on top of the man lift to get physically to touch the bottom to where we could undo it and replace it. You talk about sketchy? That was sketchy. That was it right there. It was like wear your orange vest for sure, because that was sketchy. But it was kind of the same pain in the butt, a little bit easier. Some thought it was easier, some thought it was harder than hanging underneath the thing and then replacing and moving the cables around from there. So on the back side, you have a weekly overspeed test. This has to be done prior to the ride opening, and you need the flight crew to do the overspeed test. Now, the hydraulic is just up and down. It uses a shifting valve made by Bosch. I know because there's lots of verbiage over the Bosch soft shift valve. So that is basically when you hit start or when you hit stop, the valve doesn't just go to one direction and cause the thing to suddenly go up or stop going down. Because that much cable, if you suddenly stop it, it continues to go down and can unspool, causes a big mess in the back. So the soft shift valve was basically, instead of just starting or just stopping going one way, it would smooth out that start and smooth out the stop in order to make everything slow down or speed up at a nice little rate on there. So once a week, you have to get the flight crew up there and get someone in a harness that's trained, that's the bodysuit. You have to get somebody in a flight suit, all hooked up, ready to go. And then what you do is you go up to the top and you winch them all the way back up to the top with maintenance down at the bottom. And then you coordinate with the flight crew that's out there. And what they say is, instead of a 3-2-1 fly, they ask maintenance to basically open a bypass valve on the pressure side of that hydraulic pump, that instead of putting pressure up to the hydraulic motor, it releases the pressure and lets it bypass, which lets the motor go into that runaway condition that Skycoaster was scared of doing. So once you open that bypass valve, the thing just starts unspooling really fast. Well, remember that clutch assembly I was talking about through the gearbox, that's the overspeed clutch. What you're doing is you're testing that overspeed clutch. So when you open that ball valve, it starts to open up and the person starts to come down. Now, this is a feeling feedback. As the person is coming down, they should feel as though there's a lot of resistance and they're being controlled as they come back down. Skycoaster specifically says if you feel that you're even close to a runaway condition or close to a free fall, which means that thing is just taking off and it's going really fast, they instruct the person in the harness to cut away or to pull the ripcord. So you pull the ripcord, that 3-ring release opens up, and they get themselves off of that counterweight cable that's about to suddenly stop at the bottom. That is the most important thing there. The whole time I worked there, we did that test so many times, never once came close to that condition. That wasn't a big deal. I've never actually seen that condition. We've tested for it many a times, never actually had to use it. So for annual inspections, what has to happen for the annual? Well, the tower is just like any other structure in the park, just like any other ride. It requires annual NDT. So you go out there, you have your NDT company come out there, and they have to look at the welds. If it's a monopole style, they look at all the welds holding it together. And even the lattice styles, you still have to look at that, inspect all the hardware, make sure something's not loose and rubbing and it's about to, break a bunch of bolts or rivets in half. And especially on the back tower, you got to check your anchoring going into the ground. NDT companies also check the anchors at the same time. Underneath both the monopole and the lattice style flight towers, the welds that hold on the cable mounts, those are inspected as well. And then the safeties around the flight cables are replaced, as well as the flight cables are replaced. This is also the time when most parks just go ahead and replace the counterweight and the launch cable also. Basically every year, Skycoasters get all brand new cables put on them because realistically, cable is cheap. It's really cheap for what it does, so it just makes sense every year to redo it. Now, the flight cables have all that certification and everything attached to them, so you cannot just go out and make your own flight cable. You can, however, go out and make your own counterweight cable and your own launch cable. Perfectly fine as long as you use the right stuff. Now, before I left, there was a service bulletin that came out for the Skycoasters that basically said they had a launch cable come apart. Basically, it was lifting people back up, and then the end of the eyelet just opened, and the people just swung down. Why'd the cable come apart? Did the cable break? Was it frayed? What was it? It's like, no, it was a problem with the eyelet and thimble on the other side, the crimp. Basically, the park was using a worn set of crimpers. So as they would squish the crimp down on the back side, and this is once you put cable over the top of itself, you put one of those crimps on there and you basically crush it around the cable so it pinches both sides of the cable. Well, the park was using a set of really worn crimps, and instead of putting, let's say, 1,000 psi of pressure on that crimp, it was only putting 200 psi. Well, it was still deforming that wedge just a little bit. It was still deforming that sleeve that's crimped around that cable, but it wasn't doing it enough to where eventually it just opened up and just the cable pulled straight out of it. So Skycoaster said, check your crimps, check everything, make sure they're nice and tight. And then they sent us a cable crimping gauge. It was an aluminum looking thing and it had steps in it. It wasn't something they made. It was just it's a tool that's commercially available out there. And it was basically to say, hey, if your rope is this size, when you crimp it together, it should have deformed that much right where the crimp was. So we got the gauge and we went out to ours. Ours looked fine. It was like, no big deal. We put that gauge on there and it was like, uh-oh, ours is not crimped enough. So we actually had to rush right out and go to, was it Granger? It might have been Granger. We had to buy a brand new set of crimps ourselves. And then we had to go out and we had to re-crimp those things on there and squish them down. They were probably off by about 1/4 of an inch. They were pretty far off. It was like, oh wow, that was interesting. But yeah, that was one of the service bulletins that came out and said, hey, make sure those things are crimped tight so they don't come apart. Also, annually, the suits go out for certification as well. They go back to their manufacturer, back to Skycoaster, and they have to be certified again for another year of use. At any point in time, if the suits become damaged, whether they're cut, nicked, even if it was something mundane like they were sitting in a corner and mold started growing on them, had to go back to the manufacturer to get recertified. It wasn't something you could just say, oh, it's fine, we'll just keep using it. Operational stories, there's really not much that goes on about these, especially since operations is in charge of doing everything. The most trouble calls we got out there was typically that it wouldn't winch up, which was 9 times out of 10 a problem with the pendant, just because of all the connections and stuff. They were just cheap, like wall voltage plug style connectors. So most of the time it was just a simple electrical problem with the pendant itself that they used to push up or down. We've gotten ourselves in trouble a couple of times during the inspection though. Mechanics would get lazy and they would go out there and they want to test up and down, since you have to go to that flight position so many times and go up and look at it. Well, when you want to test and go up and down with the back, the stairs can't be out. They've got to be forward because of those 2 limit switches, remember? Stairs have to be all the way forward. So mechanics all the time would get lazy, admittedly, and they would take something heavy and put it over the 2 limit switches. And they would fool the limit switches to say that the stairs were back when the stairs were not back. They were back underneath the flight line. Well, to keep the cables in one spot, to keep them from going anywhere, they would take strap material, kind of just like this strap material, which is just like ratchet strap material, and they would hook the cable to the stairs. They would hook the launch cable to the stairs. So every once in a while, it happened twice while I was there. Every once in a while, someone would bypass it, and then they would leave the launch cable hooked up to the stairs. And then they would hit the up button. And there that thing goes. It would start pulling back. And you know what? The stairs are really heavy. They're probably 1,000 pounds, which is more than that hydraulic system can handle in the back. So, but 2 times it happened. They hit the up button. it started pulling back, and it basically drug the stairs off of the little channel they sit on, because it's just like a little piece of upside down L stock that goes down the middle. There's no safeties or anything on it, so it just drug it off the channel and pulled it back. And that was, we dubbed that flying the stairs. And that was bad, because when the ride wasn't designed for that, obviously. So the 2 times that happened, we had to shut it down completely and have NDT come out and NDT everything again. And then we had to replace all the cables, which we kept 4 flight cables in stock at all times. So if we needed to, we can go replace every cable in the morning time and still have it work. But it was one of those things. It's like, after that first time it happened, it was many years that passed by. And then we had another crew come in, and they're working with us. And they're like, anything to know? And we're like, yeah, don't fly the stairs. So it was, I explained to them what happened. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's bad. And they were laughing about it. And then later on, I got a call. Can you come to the Skycoaster? It's like, why? What's going on? And they called me on the cell phone. I'm like, uh-oh, it's never good when you go off radio onto the cell phone. What's up? And they're like, we flew the stairs. I'm like, oh my gosh, no, don't do that. Oh. And I had to do it all over again. Replace everything, call the NDT company out. They had NDT everything. It was down for that weekend for sure. I think we were only in weekend operation. But it's a lot of money. A lot of money and a lot of stress on the equipment when that happens, so I had to make sure everything's okay. Alright, that's way too long for this video for a Skycoaster, but I thought you would enjoy it. Let me know what you think about it. I can answer a lot of questions to this. Some of the stuff when it comes to those flight suits and things like that, I have some pieces, but I may not have everything, so maybe someone, I know I've got a ton of operators in the comments that can answer anything flight suit related, I'm sure. Because the maintenance guys can't really answer that a lot of times anyways, because we were not certified to use the flight suit stuff. All right, you want to contact me, comments down below, perfectly fine. You can always email me at ryantheridermechanic@yahoo.com. Stay off the air gates.